Welcome to my talk. It's going to be about creativity and constraints. So when I first heard about the theme for this year, I sort of naturally assumed I would talk about chaos. And I thought, this will be super fun. I can talk about just, the stereotypical design person and how chaotic we are. Kyle have already referenced this. And I don't want to brag, but I am a real expert in chaos. It actually has nothing to do with my job as a designer and everything to do with the fact that I am a mother of 3 young children. So if you know anything about kids, you know that it's just great chaos, but pure chaos. So I want to give you just a little window into my typical Saturday morning. This is going to wake you up, just to warn you. All right, is everybody awake? Because that's 6 a.m. at my house. I don't know if you heard my 5-year-old ask if the beat dropped while he had his light up toothbrushes, but high energy. I also thought, I assumed that Kalev was going to speak about the control side, and he would make jokes about being a, control muppet, and I could poke fun at him because he's such a good sport about it. And I had seen this photo before. Some of you knew Kalev years ago, some of our clients that have been with us for a really long time. Kalev used to wear bow ties every single day. We saw his neck for the first time in 2019. And so this is a different fashion era of Kalev, but I knew his closet looked like this. I had seen this before. But then if I'm being honest, I thought about myself. I'm not really a chaos muppet. When I looked at my own closet, clearly it was half black, like every designer's closet should be. And I realized, creativity does not equal chaos. I think we often conflate those two things. And so what I really want to talk about is the other side of our theme, which is control. So I sat down to write my talk, and we all know this is the scariest part of starting any project. Limitless possibilities, no direction. The designer's equivalent is a blank Figma artboard. Figma's here in the house. Thank you for coming, Allie. And so I thought about this quote, and I really, really wholeheartedly agree with this, that the enemy of art is the absence of limitations. This is why we write creative briefs. We don't start without any direction. We start with a brief. If you've ever been to a design conference, you may have seen this brief that Andy Warhol received from Mick Jagger in 1969. I don't know if anyone's seen this. Mick Jagger wanted Andy Warhol to do the cover art for one of their albums, so he wrote this letter. The relevant passage is in the middle. So he asked him, will you do the cover art for my upcoming album? And gives him a little bit of intro, and he says, but having said that, I'll leave it in your capable hands to do whatever you want, and please write back saying how much money you would like. And so this is regularly sort of gushed over. Designers love this. They love to cite it, and they say, this is the world's best creative brief. And I have a hot take that this is a terrible brief. There's no constraints. There's no direction. There's way too much freedom here. Where would he even start? And I am vindicated in this. Andy Warhol did not even do the cover art for this album. Is it because the brief was so bad? For the purposes of my talk, yes. Somebody else, some other photographer, Schulz probably knows who this is. He probably has this record at home. Somebody else took this iconic photo. And Andy Warhol did end up doing the cover art for an album, but it cannot be in a professional presentation. So we'll skip past that. And I think this topic of carte blanche, this idea that designers do best when we have unlimited freedom, I think that's wrong. I think that can be incredibly overwhelming when you're starting a creative project. And I truly believe that breakthroughs often occur when designers are forced to innovate around constraints. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. So if we go back to this quote, I think this is a really good thing because I don't know about you all. We are asked to do more with less every single day. And I think it's really freeing to reframe the way we look at constraints and think about them as opportunities, not obstacles. And so today, I'm going to have 4 different sections of my talk. The first one, I'm going to introduce a framework, ways you can think about the different dimensions of constraints. In the second part, the best part of every design talk, we're going to look at some really cool inspiration, and we'll have some active participation in this part. And then for the third, this is a room of leaders, not, we all used to be doers, now we're leading teams. And so I want to talk about how we frame constraints for our teams. Whether you need creativity because it's a design solution or a business problem, we all need innovation and creativity. And then at the end, we're going to talk about circles and some of those photos you took for me last night, and that will make more sense later. All right, so let's start with frameworks. I found this great article from HBR. I link it in the presentation if you want to read it after. And it talks about why constraints are good for innovation. And it says the key for fostering creativity and innovation is to strike a balance by orchestrating different types of constraints. So this is going to be the framework I introduce. But before I do that, I do want to take a moment and talk about the balance part of this is really critical. Too many constraints is really demotivating, and it makes it really difficult for people to make serendipitous connections. So that's not good. But too few, chaos, can result in just analysis paralysis, right? That's the blank Figma artboard, the blank Word document. And it can prevent you from making meaningful progress. So the three dimensions, the three levers of constraints we're going to talk about today are input constraints, process constraints, and output constraints. And I'll define each of those quickly. So when I think about input constraints, that's anything that constrains what gets put into solving the problem. It might be things like time, money, people, resources. And so if we unpack like the dimension of time, if you've heard of Parkinson's law, that work expands to fill the time available for its completion, in my own experience, 100% yes. I was still updating my deck this morning, but that's because you all sent me photos. And so the concept is, that there's this peak in productivity and innovation, and then work will continue as time goes on, but you're not necessarily getting the highest output as time goes on. And so there's this optimal time, and this is what you want to constrain for your teams. If you're me, you're just going to keep working on it and keep working on it until the very last minute, and sometimes that's good, sometimes it's not. And I think if you look at this curve, this concept of a point of diminishing returns, you would see that across all the dimensions of input. Time, money, people, right? We all know if there's too many people on a project, too many cooks in the kitchen. But if there's not enough, you can't get the work done. And so it's all about finding that balance. Okay, so that's constraints of input. Now let's look at process. This is really simple. This is anything that constrains how something gets done. So in our world, that might be tools, technology, methodology, right? If you're using agile processes, that's a process constraint. And then finally, output constraints. Nancy, I think you were sort of getting at this when you asked the question earlier. This is super common for the design team and for any of you that have ever worked with clients, right? So the output constraints, that's anything that constrains what the solution should be at the end. Some output constraints we've heard. Gary says it has to be a desktop app. Okay. Marketing needs 4 videos, 30 seconds each. Why? We don't know. And then sometimes they even slide in some input constraints. So we need a totally new brand, but you can't change the logos or the fonts. Or the color palette can be anything you want as long as it's shades of blue, if you work in professional services. These are not bad. I am not saying these are bad. These are actually helpful constraints, and they take blue off the table. And then we can focus on what the solution should be and what we can put into it and how we can innovate in the process. So I'm not saying any of these are negative. They just are. All right, so now that we have that framework, let's look at some brief examples. To start, I think one of the best uses of constraints and creativity are in these reality shows. Project Runway is probably one of the first. Top Chef uses it now, and other shows that I don't have time to watch. But if you think about these episodes, they used to really increase the input constraints. You have 6 hours to make a dress, and you have to make it out of coffee filters or corn husks. And they did it. That's what these dresses were actually made out of. It was amazing, and it was part of the entertainment. It was part of the, wow, like look how creative they can be with this really, really limited input constraint. And so not only, was the show based around these constraints, I think the leadership that Tim Gunn brought ended up being the catchphrase of the whole show. Who knows what the catchphrase was? Make it work. And so I think about that a lot. And how he would walk around to the designers as they were working on it, and sometimes they would get frustrated and they would complain. He was like, you gotta make it work, you gotta figure it out. So now we're gonna do our own project assembly. So lucky you all get to be designers now, just for about 10 minutes. It's super fun, you get to be in our world. It's not stressful at all. Let's go. So there's going to be 3 challenges that you're all going to get. Challenge number 1. These are all coming to you in the form of a brief. Let's start with the output constraint. So I want you all to think of a viral Super Bowl ad that captures the magic of your most beloved memories of childhood. Pretty ambitious? Sounds fun? In terms of process, you guys are the experts. I'm not here to tell you how to do your job. Love that. And here's a mood board to get the juices flowing. So you might have a sense of what brand we're going to be creating this ad for. So far, so good, but there's always a catch, right? Well, in terms of input constraints, designers, you can't use color. And in fact, you can't use photos. Just text, and it's going to have to be one of those like system fonts. And if you could, without infringing on any trademarks, can you do a nod to the Swifties? Everybody take your pen and write down your idea. I'm kidding. This is heavy constraints. I don't know if anyone knows what I'm about to show next, but this is Disney's Well Said campaign that aired during the Super Bowl this year. Take a look. Who's seen that before? A couple of you? Now think about how that ad made you feel compared to the Apple ad that Ryan showed earlier. I cry a little bit every time I see that ad. Every time I was prepping for this presentation, I would get emotional. How did they do that? No images, no color, just words. Not even Disney music. It is just incredible. I doubt that all the constraints I listed at the beginning were actually real, and the end product may just be the result of high restraint and good creative direction, but you can't argue with the impact of that ad. It's just awesome. Okay, so now we're gonna move on to brief number 2. Here, I want everyone to make a selfie. Put your phones down though. I'm not gonna tell you how to do it, but I am gonna constrain the input. The plot twist, everybody at lunch, I put a Bic pen in front of your seat. I want you to take that out, and I want you to do a self-portrait on the paper. And then we're going to go around and show everybody's. No, I'm kidding. If you get frustrated, just imagine Tim Gunn walking around saying, make it work. I mean, given any amount of time, what do you think you could do with just a simple Bic pen? I found this artist. I found it on Reddit, and then I found his TikTok. And he actually does photorealistic self-portraits using just a Bic ballpoint pen. This is zoomed in to start so you can see the actual hash marks and the strokes that he uses. And I'm going to zoom out. It's amazing. These pens cost 59 cents each, and he creates something that looks like a photograph. Now, had I constrained the output and said it had to be full color, well, then this wouldn't work. But because there were some constraints on the input but no constraints on the output, you end up with this beautiful, beautiful image. You can actually go to his TikTok and his Instagram, and you can see videos of him doing this. It's really, really cool. All right, brief number 3. Now we're gonna make some art. We're gonna focus on environmental art. Process, again, you guys are the artists. I'm not here to tell you how to do your job. But we do have some constraint inputs. We don't have a budget for any supplies, so you're gonna have to just use found materials. Sorry. See what you can find out there, and as a bonus, we can just label it as eco-friendly. What do you think you could do? There's an artist that does just this. His name's Andy Goldsworthy. He finds found materials in nature, arranges them. Wish we could have had these circle pictures for last night. In just really incredible sort of temporary installations. He takes the photo and then nature has its way and they don't stay forever. Here's something he made out of just sticks, made out of snow and ice, made out of stones. Really, really incredible, very constrained inputs. So I think I've made my point here. Constraints don't have to be a bad thing. From these three very, very humble inputs, I just showed you three really amazing outputs. So now let's look at a couple examples that my team has worked on. We're gonna look at the One North rebrand, the identity for this assembly event that we're all at, and then we'll just look at the concept of design systems. So we'll make this feel a little bit more real. So in 2018, Tech Systems acquired One North. In 2020, we decided it was a moment we needed to rebrand. We needed to merge our visual identity with the Tech Systems identity. We wanted to authentically represent and retain everything that the One North culture meant, and revolutionize the current brand experience. So that's the old brand on the left side, the Tech Systems brand on the right side. And we had lots of constraints here. We had the constraints of merging with an already existing brand. We did not have an unlimited budget, and we needed to get this done quickly. So we actually constrained the process. I think we did it in about a month. I remember we had the whole team, everybody had to come up with a mood board. We printed them out, we put them in a room, and we had a week to do it. And then we looked and pulled the best ideas from each one, and the team evolved it into the identity that we relaunched in 2020, and we've since evolved it 2 times since then. And we ended up with this One North loop and sort of a tagline that we don't use explicitly about power on. And so I'll get back to this loop a little bit later in the presentation. So then for the assembly this year, this is another example. We had this great event last year. Ryan showed pictures of it. We had the start of an identity. We had the logo, but totally different parameters this year. And so the design team was basically given 2 inputs: the location, the Parker, and the theme of chaos and control. So Jen and Tanya and Ryan and marketing, they came up with the location and the theme, and then they handed the brief to design. So when the design team started, because we had a finite timeline, we did have inputs of time, Michael and Cassidy, who are here, when they're walking around later, you can tell them how beautiful the identity is. Michael actually came up with a bunch of different inputs using Gen AI. This is a great use case for generating high volume of ideas, and then the team sorted through these and they curated and they developed the identity on their own with these inputs. So this was one of the early mood boards. Then they evolved it into 2 different directions. I think we ended up going with the one that's a bit on the right, but blended ideas from both. You can see even early on, they had the idea for that cool tote bag that you all got. And then I don't know, little details they sprinkled in. I don't know if you all noticed, in the morning, the presenters used the sunrise palette, and then in the afternoon, the designers are using the sunset palette. Nice little touches that they added, as genius as they are. I was not allowed on this project, so it's all to credit them. Even like the color of the lanyards. White, if you're walking around, you see a white lanyard, that's the One North crew. Yellow are first-time assembly attendees, and then the orange are the veterans that have been here before. All these cool little applications. Do not start eating the toffee. You cannot stop. It is so delicious. I don't know if you guys have tried that yet. And so it was just really cool what they were able to come up with 2 constraints of location and theme in a really short amount of time. And I think it's easy to see this all come together, all the thoughtful details, and it feels inevitable at the end, but it's not. It takes work, it takes constraints, it takes focus and constant refining to get to this end moment. And then the third and final example, which will be brief, is design systems. If you're in design or UX or product, design systems are a really hot topic. And they're a perfect example of an input and a process constraint. Input is obvious. This is what our buttons look like. This is what a date picker looks like. In terms of process, you often have really comprehensive documentation and governance, so everybody knows what to do. And that frees your team up to really focus on the outcome and the output and not worry about those other pieces. So they can work on solving the business problem. And so I just finished 6 examples. Hopefully you all agree with me that constraints can be a really helpful dimension of a creative project. And so I started to think, why is this? And I was thinking about this, and I went to a coffee shop, and I saw this book, and I was like, well, this is why. Modern life is just overwhelming. Kat will talk about this later this afternoon. There are too many milks. There's just so many decisions we all have to make every single day. And so I was thinking about that, and this reel came up. And AV guys, if you can increase the volume of this. I'm going to show you this Instagram reel where this influencer is saying, can you all explain to me why marriage is hard? And I just loved this guy's answer.
Explain to me what you mean by marriage is hard.
You have to pick stuff to eat every day, multiple times a day, every day for the rest of your life. It's relentless. You're constantly in a state of needing to figure out what to eat. Figure out a restaurant that's open that you both like, you haven't gone to too recently, it's not too expensive. I do most of the cooking, and you have to pick recipes that you both are willing to eat, but that also isn't too much work. And you make the meal and you eat the meal and you're like, oh, this is so awesome. And then that moment is fleeting because right after that, congratulations, now you have to do dishes.
This is perfect. This is such a shared experience. I can tell by everyone laughing. I don't know why it's so hard. 6 p.m., we all know we have to eat every day. It is, but then you've made 12 hours of decisions in life, at your job, with your kids. And you are at this moment and you have no constraints, not enough constraints. So this is a universal experience. I've talked about it with lots of people. And so I was thinking about this when my husband and I went out to eat a couple weeks ago. We live in Atlanta. There's a new restaurant there called Bar Blanc. And I picked it because there's no menu. And it's not a Michelin-starred fancy anything. I mean, it's nice, but it was a very unique dining experience. So I want to share it with you. We sat down. There's no menu. You do get to pick your drink. And then they serve the same meal to everybody. It's just steak frites. You get really good bread. You get a good salad. You get your fries and your steak, and then your dessert. And, we'd gotten a babysitter. You saw the chaos that we're in most of the time. And we had this lovely, lovely meal together. And we weren't making more decisions. We weren't worrying about what we were going to order. We weren't spending time reading the menu. We were just talking and enjoying each other's company. And I can't wait to go back here. The food was great, but it was more the experience and that sort of clarity that it provided. 10/10 recommend if you're ever in Atlanta. So as we apply this, acknowledging that life is overwhelming, and we think about the problem, when you have no constraints, your efforts can go in all these different directions, but you never know if you're going in the right direction. So you might try one thing and then stop and start and go somewhere else, and you don't really make meaningful progress on any one of those. Whereas if you have a problem and some constraints that look a little bit like the One North logo, not an accident. And then you focus your efforts in one direction. It probably doesn't look that straight, right? You bounce around a little bit, but within sort of the warm hug of the constraints, you just make more meaningful progress. You can focus on the things you can control instead of all the things you can't. And so for this group, I sort of challenge you to think about your users in this way, right? Your users have too many milks when they go to order coffee. Your users have all this chaos in their life. And so think about, is your brand, is your product, is your experience contributing confusion or clarity? Do you need to give your users all those options on your menu or on your homepage, whatever it is? And then for the next part of my talk, I want to pivot and I want to sort of rephrase that question about what this means as leaders. And so think about our teams. Our teams all have lives like this, and they don't experience work in a vacuum. And so think about if you're contributing confusion or clarity. And if you want to contribute a little clarity, I have some great examples in my next section of things we can do. So this part is about leading through constraints. So I'm going to talk about three things: how we can adjust constraints intentionally, how we can bring clarity to the chaos, and then finally, how we can reframe constraints as possibilities. All right, so in this first section, I'm going to go back to that HBR article just for a bit. And we have these three levers: inputs, process, and outputs. And you can adjust these depending on the level of innovation you want out of your team. So every challenge is not created equal. So for example, if you have a problem that requires a more modest innovation, like a new car, you might want to increase constraints around inputs and outputs, right? The output has to be a car, probably with 4 wheels. You might want to constrain time, money, resources, people, but then decrease the constraints around process. See where your team goes. See where they, see how they solve that problem. Versus solutions that require breakthrough innovations, you kind of want to invert any constraints that you're able to control. So here, you want to relax inputs and outputs, and you want to increase process constraints. And the reason why is because if your solution requires breakthrough innovation, it probably means you have interdisciplinary teams. They're going to naturally have different ways of communicating, different ways of working. And so by increasing the process, this is why Agile often works. You sort of eliminate those differentiators of ways of working, and then they can focus on solving the problem. All right. Second, as leaders, I think it's our job to bring clarity to the chaos that our teams are experiencing. And I read this great interview with Satya Nadella, Microsoft CEO, universally does a great job at Microsoft. The stock price has skyrocketed since he took over. And he was on a panel at the Booth School, where I think he went, and he said, leaders do two things, and they're perfectly aligned to the theme of the assembly this year, which was convenient. One, they lead through chaos. So great leaders provide clarity when none exists. And two, great leaders lead through constraints, and they just find a way to succeed in over-constrained spaces. So I'm going to read this quote because he's much more eloquent than I am. The most important attribute that any leader needs to have, and is often underestimated, is the need to create clarity when none exists. You don't need a leader when everything is well-defined and easy, and all you have to do is follow a well-written plan. But in an ambiguous situation where there cannot be complete information, that's when leadership matters. And I totally agree. And I think that makes a great leader. It also makes great design, right? Design is just not about ornamentation. It's about providing information hierarchy, visual storytelling, action clarity. What do we want the users to do? So I think all these things are applicable to design. And this is supported by a quote from Johnny Ive. I think Kevin said last year, no design presentation is complete without an Apple reference. So this checks that box for me. But his quote sort of echoes what Satya Nadella said. He says, I think there's profound and enduring beauty in simplicity, in clarity, in efficiency. True simplicity is derived from so much more than just the absence of clutter and ornamentation. It's about bringing order to complexity. So finally, third, as leaders, I think our job and what we can control is we can help our teams, we can reframe constraints for our teams. And so there's two ways when your team inevitably gets a challenge and they have constraints around them. You can either frame constraints as obstacles, and of course, that's going to decrease creativity. If you emphasize those restrictions, just sort of lowers motivation to engage. Whereas if you reframe those constraints as possibilities and opportunities, that's a great way to harness the power of creativity, get everybody excited to work together on the solution, and gives them higher motivation to take risks, provided there's psychological safety, like Kalev talked about earlier. And so Satya Nadella's quote, I promise this is probably the last quote I have, leaders succeed in over-constrained spaces. Life is an over-constraint problem. So you can't say, you know what, I'm just waiting for it to all be perfect, to remove all the constraints and I'll be perfect. A follow-up interview I read with him, he was talking about leading Microsoft through COVID. And he said, I didn't have the luxury of saying, once the pandemic is over, then you'll see what kind of leader I am. You have to lead through those constraints. And again, That's about leadership, but I think great designers do this too. This is what I look for when I'm hiring somebody. This is what I really like to see my team do. They embrace constraints. They see them as possibilities, and they understand that they're a necessary part of a necessary and just part of reality when you work in an agency. So last example, this is Jim Thorpe. So this is totally not a business or design example, but it really is a story that I've always liked and hope that it resonates. So he is a famous Olympic decathlete, pentathlete. This is a picture of him in the 1912 Olympics, right before the 1,500-meter race. And I want to zoom out, and I want you to look at his feet. 2 different pairs of shoes. Right before the race, somebody stole his spikes. And so what did he do? Well, he and his coach rummaged around in the trash can. They found 2 different shoes, and apparently 2 different pairs of socks, put them on his feet. He won the 1,500 meters and went on to win gold. And so, greatness finds a way. He didn't let that keep him from achieving his Olympic dreams. And I also think about his coach. Like, his coach in that moment looked for a solution. They found the shoes in the garbage can. And sometimes you just need to make it work. And I think that's what we can do as leaders. There's a lot we can't control. There are going to be input, process, or output constraints. But there are some things we can control. And so I talked about that. But I think the most important thing we can control is how we frame constraints to our teams. And so I want you to all reflect and think, are you framing constraints as obstacles or possibilities? All right, my final section, we're going to get back to those circles. And I want to share with you all a brief that I received recently. So One North moved offices about 1 year ago. Our lease was up and we needed a different space. So we moved to this new office and it was nice, it's very cool. I hope you all can come visit us sometime. But the walls are all white, it's kind of boring. So we needed stuff for the walls of the One North office. This was the start of the brief I received. Process, again, do what you want. In terms of input, I said, do I have a budget? Is there a timeline? Is there subject matter, like what is in the stuff for the office? Do we have sizes? Is there a quantity you want? Are there materials? Who in the world would write this bad of a brief? This is real. This is real. And so here's just a view of the office. I thought about, so Ryan was asking me to engage the team, because they're so talented, in solving for this problem of a bunch of blank walls. This is the team on one of my visits to One North. You see us in front of our cool neon loop sign. On Wednesdays we wear black, apparently on Thursdays too. And so I thought about what they would need in order to deliver stuff for the walls of the One North office. So I took Ryan's brief and I did something I'd been wanting to do for a while, which was use this PowerPoint transition. And I threw it away. The output didn't change. We still needed stuff for the walls. That was the goal here. But I gave the team some input constraints. I said, let's all use the One North logo loop. You can use any available materials, but I'm going to constrain your time to 1 week, mainly because we weren't getting paid for this project and we have a business to run and clients to serve and things like that. And then for process, I said, I want everybody to come up with 1 analog and 1 digital version of this. And then I gave them a template to ensure that we were all using the right scale consistency. So still enough creative freedom here, but way more constraints than what Ryan gave me. This is a great brief. I do say so myself. So here's the logo, just to refresh everyone's memory. I was blown away with what the team came up with. I know I have a super talented team, and the cool thing is they all have outside creative interests. Cassidy does pottery, Colin does cyanotypes, which I'll show you in a minute. Michael's getting really into generative AI. Like, it's really cool stuff. And so I saw them all bring their own personality to this around the constraints. So Colin, one of our design directors, is experimenting with this printmaking technique called cyanotypes. I don't know that much about it. I know you use UV light and iron salts and something happens and make this magical print. And it's a very analog, sort of old-fashioned printmaking technique. So this is hanging in our office somewhere now. We had somebody do some really cool digital art. Cassidy was actually on her honeymoon in France, and she was making a croissant, doing a croissant making class. And so I sent this brief out, not expecting her to do it on her honeymoon. And she sent me this photo. It was so cool. We just had unbelievable, super creative things. I could show these all day. I think we're going to put this one in the kitchen of the office. These are light trails. So Paul, one of our designers, took a camera and did like long exposure at night. Now we're getting into some of the Gen AI ones that Michael did. Really, really cool stuff. So you kind of look at this suite of cool stuff for the One North walls. And I cannot stop seeing circles now. Like, you guys are, now you're in this too, because you had to do the activity last night. I was at the park with my daughter. Circles, there they are. My son Bodie was eating Cheerios in the morning. Circles, like they're everywhere. And so as I was thinking about this event and this cool space that we have at the Parker and all of your experiences here as attendees, I wanted to give you a reason to go around and explore, and that's why I gave you that activity last night. So the little coasters you all got at the croquet dinner. And I want you to reflect back on how you felt when I asked you to do two things. The first one, take any photo. We got some real random stuff from you guys. Thank you for playing along. I'll show you what we got. Clearly, that's the no constraints. That's too few. And then the second brief was take a photo of a circle, anything around the Parker. So let's look at how you guys did, and I hope you had fun taking those photos. Do you know you know? This is a cool space. So even with no direction, there is some cohesion to this, unless you sent photos that weren't taken at the Parker, which was totally allowed. We did get 3 cats, which is, I don't know, pretty high number for this. And we got some people, we got some art. It's great, you guys did awesome. However, we got way more photos of circles. I'll show you here what everybody came up with. All here at the Parker. You're not going to be able to stop seeing circles now. I'm sorry to tell you, you're going to see them everywhere. But I want you to reflect on which one was more helpful. Did it feel a little bit too open-ended when I said, just take a photo of anything that's on your camera roll? How did you feel with that brief versus one where it was still open-ended, but I said, just take a photo of a circle? And I want you to think about that whenever you see a circle and remember how you can frame those constraints and provide that right balance of freedom and constraints to your teams. So I'll end with a couple quotes from people smarter than I am. And you've heard this before, earlier in my talk. I just love this. This is real talk from Satya Nadella. Life is an over-constraint problem. But hopefully, after listening to my talk, you feel okay about that, because constraints are barriers that lead to breakthroughs. And so I want you to take away from this that we should all sort of embrace the reality that life is a mix of chaos and control. We're going to have constraints, and let's view those as possibilities and see what we can all create. Thank you.
That was awesome. Whoever thought constraints would be a good thing? I did not.
I know.
All right. Is Nancy here, or did she step out for a second?
She left.
Okay, she had to go. Hopefully you answered her question.
I addressed it. Yeah.
I think you did. All right. Anything from the crowd? Where are my creative people? What did we think? What the constraints? How do you react to them?
Speechless.
Anybody?
All right, great.
All right.
Colin got all the hard questions. Oh, no.
Is that fair?
Sure.
I noticed a couple times that your way out was actually to give yourself constraints. You talked a little bit about agents or advice. If somebody is that a way out? So how do you go about giving yourself
I guess I can think of an example where we've done that at One North on the team. When I was like creative directing a website project, I used to start with an activity where I'd give everybody a brief and tell them about, the company and the project. And I would set a timer for 20 minutes, and I'd give everybody a sheet of paper, like the old-fashioned way. And I would say, I want 20 homepage ideas in 20 minutes. And so it put this constraint of time around it, and it would force people to ideate really quickly, not overanalyze something. And then, of course, we would have, weeks of revising those ideas. But it was, one mechanism for just getting all those ideas out without overthinking it. And so I think it's about leveraging constraints, even if they're temporary. Like, that's a temporary constraint. And I sort of invented that because I saw a lot of good innovation come from the team from that. If it was that high pressure the whole time, I think that'd be a really poor employee experience. Probably wouldn't get thoughtful, creative output. But in that moment, I think it was helpful. So.
Well said. Anyone else?
Sorry I don't have balloons this year.
No, that was great last year.
They're permanent fixtures on the stage. So.
I'm going to build on 2 shout outs. One, Cassidy and Michael, if you can each wave so everybody knows who you are.
Beautiful work.
Amazing work on the branding year in and year out. Oh, we do have a question.
Oh, okay.
Sorry
Mark.
to interrupt the close. No,
No.
I just wanted to make a comment. Thank you for this. It's so relevant. We're both from UCLA. We're both new members of the leadership team. I lead strategy. Hill leads our creative team. And we have a content team that has come primarily from a news background and still really kind of retains a fidelity to the higher purpose of, publishing news for the greater good. They're really struggling with adapting toward working in a business that has a strategic direction. And we're trying to sort of bring this adoption of strategic priorities into our content team. And those constraints are causing like an allergic response with that
That's
team.
common.
Right? So I love the way that you're interpreting this and kind of framing this in this perspective of possibility. I think you need to come and talk to our content team and give this presentation.
Happy to come out to California.
Yeah. So just thank you. It's very helpful for us. Thank you.
Great. I'm glad to hear that. There was this. He's sort of a team psychologist that I encountered in college, and he had this phrase called "control the controllables," and that's what he would teach everybody, different athletes, and. There's so much you can't control, and it's not worth spending time on that. And so his reframing of control the controllables, like what you are able to, was really freeing. And so I remembered that and almost put it in my talk, but now you're giving me a chance to reference that. So thank you. Glad it was helpful.
Cool. I'm going to do one more shout out. Allie, if you would wave, I think you were called out. Allie
from Figma is here.
It's one of our
Thank
big
you.
partnerships that we have as a design agency is the Figma design tool. And I'll put a plug in. Figma's conference is the end of June.
June 26th. Yep.
Yep, Config. And we actually have Jessica and Derek from United will be speaking on a panel together there.
So now that I finished this talk, I can write that talk.
Yep, there you go. All right, thank you, Jessica.